preparing. Preparing. Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to the Centre for Health's Hauora Kōrero this evening about inflammation and immunity. We have this amazing panel with us this evening, but I'm really sorry to say, I don't think the facilitation is going to be quite as amazing as the panel. Our marketing and communications extraordinaire, Natalie Hilterman, who usually runs this show with beauty and poise, is unavailable this evening. So I'm sorry, Whānau, you're stuck with me. So I'll do my very best to make sure that this Hauora Kōrero is at least a little bit as good as our previous ones. So bear with me, but welcome and thanks for joining us this evening. So I'm sure most people out there know who I am by now. Ko Anna Rolliston tōku ingoa, no tauranga mōna aho. I'm Anna. I'm Managing Director here at Manawa Ora, the Centre for Health, and it's my pleasure to host these wonderful people on our panel this evening, and they'll introduce themselves very shortly. So we usually start our Hauora Kōrero with either a karakia or a whakatauki, and tonight we have a whakatauki, which is Inumia ngā wai o te puna manawa, kia whai te mātauranga, kia mau te mātauranga, kia u me whakatinana te mōhiotanga, which means drinking the sparkling waters from the springs of well-being, to pursue the knowledge, to embrace the understanding, to transform and establish the knowing. And so the reason why we chose this whakatauki for tonight's kōrero, because these Hauora Kōrero that we run monthly, they're about sharing knowledge, so that we can all of us here on the panel and you guys out there at home, that we can all grow in our understanding of things Hauora. And then that understanding becomes a knowing, and then we integrate that into our lives. So it's a little bit of a long one for this evening, but it's actually a really nice whakatauki. So I'll just repeat it again. Inu mea ngā wai o te puna manawa, kia whai te mātauranga, kia mau te mātauranga, kia u me whakatinana te mōhiotanga. Drink the sparkling waters from the springs of well-being, to pursue the knowledge, to embrace the understanding, to transform and establish the knowing. Kia ora whānau. So we're just going to do a quick round of introductions around the virtual tepu tonight. And Hannah, I think we'll start with you. Thanks.
Evening whānau. Ko Hannah tāku ingoa. I'm a clinical exercise physiologist here at the Centre for Health.
Is that all you got to say tonight, Hannah?
Yeah. Yeah, I've just got out of the flow presso, which you'll soon learn is why that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Hannah. Desiree, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good evening, whānau. Ko Desiree Despong. I am a lymphatic therapist and teacher. I've been in the industry for about 20 years, and more recently am the mad scientist behind the development of Flow Presso, which is at the Centre for Health.
Kia ora. Thanks, Desiree. We look forward to hearing a little bit more about that. And Anthony, kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora whānau, ko Anthony Jordan tōku ingoa. I'm a clinical immunologist and allergist here in Tāmaki Makaurau.
Awesome. Thanks, crew. So, Hannah, can you just start us off with why are we here? Why are we here talking about inflammation and immunity?
Well, I was going to start by saying we're here to talk about inflammation and immunity. And basically our bodies are incredible. They protect us from so many things. They allow us to do so much, achieve so much, and keep going despite everything seemingly to be against us sometimes. Our immune system is one of the most complex yet important things that we have that protect us. And unfortunately, sometimes it might not be as strong as it needs to be, as you might be able to hear from my voice right at the moment. And inflammation is another one which is talked about so frequently now. There's so many different environmental factors, as well as genetic factors, as well as everything else that can impact on inflammation and the way that our body responds to inflammation. So hopefully tonight we will give you some more information, some more knowledge around inflammation and immunity and how you can help protect yourself, particularly as winter seems to have arrived in full blast and it's bloody freezing outside at the moment. So hopefully you can take away a few snippets of how to care for yourself and improve both factors, so you can be strong come summer and come your summer holidays. Yeah.
Amazing, Hannah. Thank you. So, Anthony, we'll start off with you. Can you tell us what's the relationship between inflammation or long-term inflammation and disease? Like, why do we talk about inflammation and its relationship to all these health conditions that we're trying to look after?
Yeah, so inflammation is a good thing if it's controlled. So I'm sorry to say to my colleague, your virus that you have, that's, I'm presuming what you've got, your body's actively clearing that out now through its normal inflammatory processes. But inflammation should end. When the trigger is no longer there, it should go, okay, settle it down, the tissues start repairing. The problem with inflammation is when it continues on unchecked or unregulated, it can do damage. And I kind of think about, we've probably all got examples of people that we know. I think of people that get arthritis, for example. You know, they wake up in the morning, their joints are hot, swollen and tender, whereas most of us, well, hopefully most of us on the call don't get that every single day. And so there are times when the inflammation continues on without an apparent trigger, and the inflammation becomes what we call chronic, long-term, and it starts to cause damage to tissues, and that's when it causes long-term problems for us and can lead to symptoms that sort of linger on for a long, long time. So we always want to keep inflammation as a process that's in check, it's useful, but it's not something that our body should have to experience long-term.
Yeah, and so like what kind of health conditions does chronic long-term inflammation lead to?
I think most of us will know some simple ones. You know, asthma is a good example. You know, there's chronic inflammation in asthma. And so even if we don't have a bad period of asthma, and a lot of our asthmatics, they have to take treatment every day to keep that inflammation in check. And even minor changes like maybe a cough or a cold can trigger inflammation that's really, what I'd say, out of keeping with what most people would expect to get. So asthma is a good example of chronic inflammation. Rheumatoid arthritis, we always hear about rheumatoid arthritis. Hopefully no one has to put up with rheumatoid arthritis, but again, waking with joint pain, swelling, redness over your joints, those are really probably common symptoms that people maybe put up with that they don't need to. And that's chronic inflammation. That's inflammation that we should get under control.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony. So just throwing it out to the panel as a whole, what are some warning signs that someone might have an underlying long-term inflammatory condition going on that they might want to, you know, go and find someone to talk to about it? What are some of the things that you guys see in your practice that would tell you that there's something going on from an inflammation perspective for people? Hannah?
Yeah, well, I think some of the kind of more broad ones, gut issues, but also even just things like fatigue, tiredness, chronic fatigue. Yeah, those are two pretty broad ones that Anthony's probably got some more specific things.
Yeah, so I've kind of given two examples of conditions, but again, I think Hannah's right. Those are things that I'd tell you you've got, but it's the symptoms or things that you get every day that keep coming back. You know, so it can be those fatigue, tiredness, other things, but things that are really out of keeping with what you would expect. And sometimes our first port of call is to ask other people, you know, are you sore every morning when you get up? Is your gut doing this? And so sometimes our whānau can be our first checkpoint to say, you know, I don't think this is kind of normal. I don't think I should be worried about that. And that's a really good check, not just for inflammation, but anything in terms of just sort of using friends and whānau as our soundboard And then sometimes you'll come and see like one of us, and all of us on this screen here today have our areas of interest, our areas of expertise, and then we take that information and say, here's what I think the process is that is going on. And sometimes we give them labels, sometimes we can't give them labels because we need to do a bit more testing. And then over time, we sort of formulate what we think that represents. And that's probably one of the most important things, is ask someone, get it checked out, and then we can help.
Yes, Whānau, did you hear that? Ask someone, get it checked out. Get it checked out. I'll just keep repeating that over the course of the call. Desiree, what do you see quite a lot of in your practice?
Digestive issues is definitely a biggie. Swelling, consistent swelling, and sinusitis, like the sinus issues all the time that just never go away. They're a common one that we see often. Those, and then obviously, you know, when you're dealing with things like lymphedema or major swelling, you can get cellulitis and all those other things that can come, and joint pain is a biggie as well. So those are very common in our practice.
Yeah. So, you know, I know lots of people, I think, you know, if you've got a virus, like Hannah's probably got a virus going on at the moment. So you've got a virus, and that makes heaps of sense, isn't it? You've got some inflammation going on, your immune system doing what it needs to do. But as how does this all come about? Like, what is it about the environments that we are in that contribute to the fact that our bodies are going through this inflammation and immune process? That's throwing it out to all of you. Like, what is it about our environment that causes this to happen?
Holidays. Just don't do them. I'm kidding. Come back to
I was going to say daycare. But
yes.
I think you're right. This is something that's environmental. You know, we're constantly in environments where our bodies are exposed to things, our bodies check it, fight it off, can't fight it off. And, you know, I'm not dooming you, Hannah, but even as something as simple as a virus, some people get, you know, a 3-month cough afterwards, and the virus is long gone. But there's a good example of your immune system's triggered. It's altered your normal process in your airways, and your airways just remain active for a long time. And then, for example, in Desiree's area of expertise, you know, she's talking about lymphedema. You know, lymphedema, even in the absence of active infection, cellulitis, causes chronic inflammation and the tissues they affect. So this is something where, you know, we always think it's external, but there's an element of our body responding to it as well that gives those persistent symptoms. And we might manage it differently. You know, Hannah's not going to necessarily need antibiotics, but Desiree may see someone that needs antibiotics in the beginning, but she's still got to manage that long-term lymphedema so the infection doesn't come back, and sort of treat the underlying process that's happening.
And I think another big thing, sorry Anna, just in terms of the environment as well, is the impact of stress. Like, we talk a lot about the fight or flight response, and essentially a fight or flight response is us being busy, us constantly worrying about something, us possibly not sleeping, probably having way too much on our plates, carrying things in the back of our mind. It's our body responding to something by putting us into this fight or flight response, and that is our bodies physically preparing to literally fight or fly away from something. And when we're physically preparing to do that, our immune system is down-regulated. All of our energy is going towards this physical thing that might actually never happen. And so, like you said before, Anthony, inflammation should be a short-term thing that's there to fix and solve an issue. Unfortunately, so many of us nowadays in the world that is so busy and so crazy and expecting so much, and if you get lost in your own thoughts, then that's another issue in itself. We're constantly in this fight or flight response, and we don't turn it off. And so our immune system is just permanently down-regulated. And so if there is anything that's out there like a virus, but even just the cold, change in season, a bit of dampness or anything like that, you can be affected. And unfortunately, your immune system isn't in a place to protect you. And so your body goes into this acute inflammatory phase, which unfortunately, unless you actually give it the chance to recover, and I can hear my mum in the background saying, are you listening to yourself? But unless you give yourself the chance to recover, to sleep, to slow down, you know, it might not end in a few days, it might not end in a few weeks, it could be something that lasts for months or even years, and then eventually might turn into something more sinister or serious. So I think our environment, but also the way that we manage ourselves within our environment has a huge thing to, or has a huge part to play in our response to inflammation and our immunity as well.
Yeah, that's awesome, Hannah. Hey, I just want to touch on something because you mentioned dampness. And this country that we live in, I don't know about you guys, but I grew up in a home that had no insulation. And it was freezing cold. I remember running from my bedroom down to the fireplace that Dad had got up some ungodly hour in the morning to stoke, and you'd stand in front of the fire and put your clothes on. And it wasn't ever, you know, it wasn't a warm, dry environment. And not because we didn't, you know, have the resources to have a good home, but actually that's just how homes were built in this country back in the 60s and 70s and earlier. So there's something in that too, isn't there, about the quality of the environments that we're in lots of the time, like your home and your office or wherever your workplace happens to be. And so thinking a little bit about the quality of those environments and having an impact on the quality of our health. Yeah. Hey, Desiree, heard this word lymphatics or lymphatic system. Can you tell us what it is and what it does for us, why it's helpful?
Well, I'm going to keep it super simple, just so that our viewers have an understanding. But, you know, the immune system's part of the lymphatics, so it's all interlinked. So it's really important to understand its role. So I'm going to, the analogy isn't going to be so super lovely, but basically, if you think of it from a point of view of, as when you go to the bathroom, you go to the toilet, you flush the toilet, and you want to get rid of what's in the toilet, right? The lymphatic system plays a very similar role. It's taking the junk or the byproduct out of the tissue space, so where the cells bathe and hang out, and it's taking it into a piping system very similar to, like you would think of as if it was going to the transfer station to be cleansed and processed, which is ironically where the lymph nodes are. So just thinking of it as a piping system, taking it away, and as it enters into the lymph nodes, that's where we're getting all this activity. So our immune, so where our, you know, lymphocytes are the great immune cells to come in and do what its job. So it's a bit like a transfer station where it decides, what do I keep, what do I dump? And then it then moves back through the blood. But the lymphatics is sort of building its own momentum now of understanding, like, for example, Hannah talking about not being stressed. Stress will have a significant impact on the function of the lymphatics. And also from a point of view of, if you're in a stressed state, you have less movement of lymphatics. So a good example is when we go to sleep at night, our fluid usually goes down, right? We actually reduce in swelling. And so this is another reason we want to sleep well, because ironically, we have now, science has proven, our lymphatics of the brain. And we know now that, you know, you need up to about 7 to 8 hours good sleep, quality sleep, to drain the brain as well. So that adds another whole importance around, you know, how it functions and the validity of having it operating well. I think just to bring it back to how do we move lymph, I think some of the things that we need to understand is, the first thing is the breath. Breathing not only helps us live, right? But breathing actually is one of the biggest diaphragmatic breathing. So deep breathing, especially your out breath, is going to help pump those lymphatics. Unfortunately, the lymphatic doesn't have a pump like the heart. So it's relying on muscle movement or breath. So if we're sitting a lot, we're going to get a lot of extra fluid sitting in the pelvic area. And it's really hard to then push it up because it works against gravity, and it's got to get back up to here and come back to the heart to then be cleansed and moved out through the body. So some of the big things that we can do at home is just move. You know, yoga is learn to, you know, good stretching, or yoga is shown to be one of the best for lymphatic movement. Improving the breath will not only get you out of that stress, fight, flight, down regulate inflammatory response, but it's also going to help you move your lymphatics.
I think you've just taken my next question off me, Desiree.
Oh, sorry.
Which is like, how do we look after it? What are some practical things so we can breathe? And that, when you say diaphragmatic breathing, maybe if you could explain what that means, and movement. So does that mean that if I'm at my desk, I've got 4 hours of Zoom meetings, that I should move around, or I should just quit my job? That's what you're saying, Anthony? To just quit my job.
So to answer your
is it enough just to like walk to the door and back, or do I need to do something more than that?
Well, to answer the first question, so diaphragmatic breathing is really as simple as, let's say, belly breathing. We want to get the belly pushing out, but we also want to get a bit of chest. I always make that funny analogy. As we grow up, as girls used to say, I must increase my bust, and it was that movement to get this, I was from Dunedin, we were pretty simple down there. But the whole way of actually pumping that chest wall is actually a great way to be able to move fluid up through that's called a thoracic duct, which is just a tubing system to get it to the blood. So diaphragmatic to me is actually getting a real extension in the belly, and you can lie down on the floor and just put a little book on your belly, on your stomach or on your puku, and actually just do some deep breathing where you can actually try and push the book up, and then that way you're actually getting some more extension to the diaphragm, which is the sort of the muscle groups that sit around the ribs. But I find also the breathing out is really important. If you're dealing with a lot of stress, imagining you're breathing through a straw, so the is actually going to really push that diaphragm more, but it also helps people let go of their stress, and it actually helps pump the lymphatics more. So that's the first thing from the diaphragmatic. From a movement, if you are working at a desk 4 hours a day, it is really important you're up and moving. And yes, you could go to the door and back, but it's probably not going to be enough. You really want to get up and do a little bit of stretching, movement. So, like even if it's just 5 minutes, and breathing is going to help as well. So the more we move, the more we stretch, the more we move in life. So that's both our lymphatics, but the way we are feeling and the vitality you get. Whereas if you're stuck in what we call stagnant and sitting in one place all the time, nothing is moving, and then you're not getting vascular movement as well as lymphatics.
Awesome. We might segue into this Flowpresso suit that as the mad scientist you've invented, Desiree. So those of you out there who are familiar with what we do at Manawa Order, you'll know that we have one of Desiree's Flowpresso suits, and lots of people come and use it with us. And we've got a little research project running alongside that's about to start too. So that's super exciting for our collaboration with Desiree. But can you tell us a little bit about this suit, and what is it, and what made you think of creating something like that?
So being in the industry for as long as I was, you started to realize that in some cases people needed help to move their lymphatics. It was in a situation. So pneumatic pumps have been around in hospitals for a long time. So often if you've had surgery, you put in, leg pieces to try and pump the fluid as part of recovery. So it's not something that's unusual, but where I wanted to take it was I was seeing conditions that weren't getting help, that weren't able to move their fluid. So I figured, well, your lymphatic system's a whole system, it's the whole body. So why wouldn't we create something that covered most of the body? And then I'd worked with some research around heat, and I was starting to see that if I wanted to change a tissue environment, so we'll use lymphedema as a good example, it kind of goes a little bit like I use the word cellulite, or it kind of really thickens and it changes that tissue environment. And I'm trying to get heat in, and we all know how we feel when we get heat. We start to move warmth. Now, this is not for chronic inflammation where you've got redness and swelling. I'm talking about when a lot of people are quite cold, and women out there, most women would say that they relate to having a cold buttocks and cold legs, and there's stagnation when it comes to lymphatics. So I decided to put it all together. What we didn't realize is that the whole concept was for lymphatics, but when we started to put people in the suit, it delivered something similar to what we call deep pressure therapy, which is basically we wrap you up, love you, and hug you. And so it was creating this change for people where they were down regulating, especially in heart rate variability, which is a testing system to show that we were getting you out of your stress. And what was happening is we were starting to get not only the results in the lymphatic world, but we were also starting to change in our research we did with first responders here in New Zealand. We got a 91% improvement in sleep and up to 53% change in anxiety and stress. You know, I just think really the world needs to feel safe right now. And a lot of people just want to feel hugged. And this thing is a beautiful way of getting people in. They're fully clothed, which I think is a huge thing. You know, you feel safe in that alone. And you just get to have 40 minutes in your own bubble, in your own space, in your own connection of self. And right now we've sort of, because of our environment in the last few years, has made us so heightened that if we don't down-regulate and get back into parasympathetic, we can't down-regulate the inflammatory markers. So I think it ended up being a lot bigger than I expected and what it could do. And but it is truly heartwarming. Some of the stories, I had a lady reach out, a practitioner down to Kahawai, and she is starting to put her whānau out, and the results, she said, have been phenomenal. She was in tears because she was telling me of one particular woman who had constant leg pain, and she was not sleeping, hadn't slept properly for 2 years. And emotionally, she was very stressed out, like quite struggling to manage her stress levels. And she said to me, Desiree, one session, and she's ringing me crying because she slept all night, to the point the husband was about to call the emergency room thinking something had happened to her. She had minimal pain and she felt happy for the first time in a long time. So, you know, those stories, I'm just getting more and more. I mean, we're international now. We're also in the US and Australia, but you know, it's been very heartwarming to hear how it's been helping people, you know, manage their stress, feel safe, and feel loved again and hugged.
Yeah, we call it the magic soup at Centre. And sometimes you whānau out there who are watching can't get in because the staff have booked up all the slots in the booking system. So sorry about that. I'll see if I can work something out. So, Anthony, as an immunologist, what are some of the common issues that you see with patients? And I actually do just want to touch on shingles, actually, as if you could speak a little bit about shingles. I've recently come back from a cardiac conference in Australia, and they were talking about the relationship between shingles and heart disease, which I found super interesting. And I feel like we've seen it more in the last few years than I remember seeing it before. I don't know if that's a fact or not, but could you talk to us a little bit about that?
So in my practice, I see what I would say is immune regulatory problems that can be under immunity in some people whose immune systems are not working. That's bad. It can lead to, you know, chronic infections or chronic inflammation, and even long-term can lead to problems with cancer as well. And then the other side is the overactive immune system. So things as simple as allergies. You know, everyone will know someone who, you know, is allergic to dust mites in their house or grasses and stuff like that. You know, that's a really, really common way that people recognize that their immune system is responding more than anyone else's. So that's kind of the sort of extremes of what we see: underactive immunity and overactive immunity. So different conditions in different ways. Shingles is probably something that is one of those things that, you know, we see chickenpox as kids and we keep it at bay. Our immune system learns, or we've been vaccinated, our immune system knows not to get chickenpox. So we're educated and we have a memory of that, and our body protects us. As time goes on, like anything, if your immune system's not working well, it doesn't keep that memory. And often later on in life, we forget it, and then the virus reactivates. So it's there, it reactivates, and it can cause shingles the second time. I think we all know that, we've talked about it tonight, that stress and the impacts of life can bring that. You know, it's not just older people getting it, we're seeing it happening at younger people. I saw someone, you know, sadly just last week that was in her 30s that, you know, had a bout of shingles, and it was really, really bad. And in her case, yes, she had some treatment that was suppressing her immune system, but a lot of people have that, and all the factors that we talked about, mobility, keeping well, getting good sleep, and the stress that she was under also had an impact of why now. And I think we have had, since, you know, COVID and all of the things that have been happening in the world, just a sort of barrage of stress. And that's that threshold of keeping those things under control or in check or at bay has just been so much harder for people, whether or not they express that or they hold it inside. Sometimes our immune system tells us, and we were talking the other day about, it's always the way that I'm working, and you all get this, and then I decide to stop, I have a holiday, and then all of a sudden I get sick. And, you know, your immune system's fantastic, but it can only put up with so much. So you got to take care of it. And, you know, sleep, I completely agree. Connectivity and the other things that Desiree was just talking about, they're all such important factors that play into our bodies being well and our immune systems being active. And I think that's something definitely over the last 4 or 5 years, people have really felt probably a lack of. And so we're getting back into hopefully a more connectivity state now, and hopefully, you know, although we're seeing lots of viruses circulating again because the world's moving again, we've got to put in play all those other things that can help us stay well.
Yeah, thank you. Because we always talk about stress. Like, we end up talking about stress in almost all of these Hauora Kōrero, regardless of what the topic is, because it seems to be such a big trigger for everything. And I think the reality is that we're all stressed, even though if we're like, yeah, I'm fine. Sitting through 4 1-hour Zoom meetings is not the recipe for being fine. And as you said, work, plus family, plus driving in the traffic, all of those types of things. I think what you've said has made me think that we need to, as a society, acknowledge that we are under stress, regardless of what our situation is, what our job is, what our family looks like. It's the norm now, and so therefore we really have to start looking after our immune systems, because they're not working as well.
And it's like, you know, the story that people talk about, you know, if you're in a pot of hot water and it's warm to start with, and then you gradually ratchet it up over time, we start losing perspective on, actually, I'm boiling now. this is not good. And that's a really good analogy, I would say, for all of us in life in general, but to just reflect back on the last couple of years, is there's been so much stress. We just think it's normal. We just think it'll end, but actually we haven't got that external voice saying, actually, you got to get out of the pot. You know, no one's going to turn down the stove for you unless you get out. And so it's one of those things that check with other people, just go, oh, I don't think this is right. You know, and we've all done it, Anna and I, in meetings, sort of go, this sounds a bit funky. And that's that checks and balances. Our immune system sometimes needs for us to call stop on things and allow ourselves to rest and recover.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be a tagline for this kōrero: get out of the pot. I am boiling. Okay, Hannah, I want to go back to something you mentioned at the beginning. You talked about the gut when we were talking about where you might find symptoms of, experience symptoms of inflammation. Can you talk a little bit more about why the gut's important in this conversation, what the gut microbiome is as well?
Yeah. Well, I guess if you think about the ways that bugs and things can get into the body, the nose and the mouth are the two key areas. So things that we breathe, but I'll leave that as another topic. But anything that we eat has the ability to either be absorbed as nutrients and provide goodness for our bodies to develop and grow and strengthen and look after itself, or they might just be things that our brain might be telling us that we feel like, and they actually provide no benefit to us at all, and in fact just create acidity in a pretty nasty environment. So we have a lot of these awesome little bugs in our gut bacteria, and they're either doing an awesome job at absorbing those nutrients and providing us with hormones and good chemicals that are looking after our body and our immune system, or they're not so great and they're creating inflammation and destroying things and causing havoc. So ideally, what we eat should be promoting the growth and the development of those good bacteria. Unfortunately, if we don't have a good gut microbiome and there is inflammation already going on in the gut, regardless of what we eat, sometimes our gut can't absorb it. And so that comes back to looking at other things like stress. Like I said at the start, when our body's in a fight or flight state, all of our energy is going to that physical reaction. The last thing we need to do when we're trying to fight or fly away from something is digest food. So all of we're getting minimal energy to our gut, and we're seeing so many more inflammatory gut issues or allergies to certain types of foods. And yet we're eating a hell of a lot more preserved foods. There's a lot more sugar, salt, meat, processed meat, not so great stuff in our diets now, but actually if our gut's not getting the energy it needs to digest that food properly, then we're not giving it the opportunity. It also needs to look after itself as well. So unfortunately, sorting out the gut bacteria is not as simple as taking a probiotic and drinking more water. It involves looking at a few different aspects of your life. Nutrition is a huge part of it, but also gut needs time to rest. Are you giving it time to rest? Are you sleeping enough? Are you drinking enough water? What are your stress levels like? And perhaps, and unfortunately, it might be a case that there has actually been some damage done. So having some more assessments done to look into that, and if there's remedies out there to help sort that, to get you back to a place where the correct nutrition can then help manage those symptoms. So yeah, our gut's really, really important. You need to enjoy the food that you eat, but you also need to recognize that food is a fuel. So we need to use it well to get the most and the benefit out of our bodies.
So what kind of food can I eat to make my gut better, or got more bacteria in it? Good stuff.
Not those Doritos down there that I can see.
Damn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, basically, just eat real food is the key. Real food, and like I always remember the one that if your grandma would recognize it, it's probably good for you. It's the type of stuff that if you leave it on the bench for a while, it's probably going to go moldy. Eat colourful food. Colourful because nature made it colourful, not because the food colouring or the various dyes or whatever made it colourful. But I'm also the advocate that your food is to be enjoyed. Food should make us happy. Food also needs to be tasty. Otherwise, what is the point? We're here to live, but you need to make sure that the food that you eat is also doing benefit. So eating a variety of foods cooked in different ways. We're blessed to have so many different options out there now. So, as long as they're real food and it's tasty, go for gold within reason.
My grandmother used to bring us over this thing. It was called a lardy cake. And it was basically a sponge that I think was soaked in lard and sugar, and you would cut it and it would go and it would be all drippy. So in terms of the food that my grandmother would
maybe I'm
not sure that
I'll go back on that. And actually, the more I think about it, my granny used to boil Brussels sprouts and broccoli so that they were so limp and tasteless, you'd probably get more nutrients from the water. So okay, maybe let's go off of that. I'll think of something better.
But she also had a veggie garden, so I'm not going to knock her. Yeah, she had a ginormous veggie garden. So yeah.
I think key things: just eat real food, cook it well, don't boil or steam or microwave the hell out of it, and it should be tasty. But I think the other thing to recognize as well is that unfortunately sugar and salt are highly addictive, and if we're trying to change what we're eating, and all of a sudden you decide you're going to cut out sugar, you're going to cut out bread, you're going to cut out all the takeaways straight away from your diet, it's going to work for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, but your brain is going, what the hell are you doing? You're starving me of these things that I want. And you're going to start craving it more and more and more. So sometimes going cold turkey isn't necessarily the way, unless you've got really good levels of motivation and people there to support you and keep you on track. And it takes 6 to 12 weeks for your taste buds to change and adapt. And I can guarantee if you give yourself 3 months of reducing or cutting back on takeaways, on sugary foods, on processed foods, in 12 weeks, if you go and eat that piece of meat or that burger or that takeaway and just take your time eating it, it's probably going to taste really salty or really fatty or sweet all of a sudden, because your taste buds have adapted. So it takes time. The brain can be a pretty strong convincer that you need to do other things sometimes. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome answer, Hannah. That's awesome. Hey, Anthony and Desiree, I want to ask about vitamin C, because we get lots of people come in, especially at this time of the year, and they're like, oh, I'm just piling up the vitamin C and I've got all these tablets that I bought from the chemist. What are your thoughts, you guys, on vitamin C?
I just go back to what Hannah was talking about. You know, people always come in saying, what can I take? What can I supplement? What can I do? I'm like, well, actually, if you eat the right foods, you're going to get the adequate nutrition. For most of us anyway. There are some people that, you know, for whatever reason, they can't absorb it very well. But the most of us actually get enough vitamins and supplements through our normal diet. We don't need to go and buy something to put into our diet usually. And there was, you know, previous data that showed if you do mega doses of vitamin C, it actually probably doesn't help immunity if you put too much vitamin C load into your system. Actually, what you want is constant intake of all the right things, because then your body's getting what it needs all the time, and that's much better for immune regulation rather than just going for these mega doses down at wherever you get it from for a short period of time, and then your body goes, okay, where's it all gone? Because actually it goes into a phase afterwards, like it's lost its you know, all that supplements that it was used to, and actually at some point your gut just doesn't absorb it and it'll just go out the other end. So as you're flushing it down the toilet, think of all the money that's gone with it. You're probably better off having some mandarins.
Very good. Lots of toilet conversation this evening. I like it. Desiree, anything to add there?
Look, yeah, I agree on some of this, because you do, when you over supplement, you will end up, especially vitamin C, you do end up urinating it out. And it's, you know, I think like everything, it has its place. We do need things at certain times, like right now with Hannah being really unwell, you know, maybe uptaking some sort of vitamin C. But see, if you're just taking one thing, when you start to understand chemical composition, you understand that other things play a bearing on how well you absorb it. So it's not just one thing all the time. We need a combination. And like we were talking, the more variety of your diet, the more live the food is. Like I personally have a veggie garden because I love the whole idea of going out and picking it and eating it almost live, because it's just come from the garden. And, you know, so to me, it's that variety. But I mean, I think all of these things have their place, but I think we rely too much on them. And like Anthony rightfully said, the body gets used to it. After a while, it's just going to go, well, you know, I've got that, what do I need it? And, you know, and there is like, I mean, in the US and in cancer therapies, they do the IV vitamin C. And, you know, it is often that everyone will talk about, they go and get it in, costs them about $240, and then they go to their toilet afterwards and they smell vitamin C. And I'm like I'm just going, you know, wow. But it does, you know, there is some good research. It has got some validity. But again, you know, I think us coming back to that conversation of the more alive our food is, the more taste. I also want to add the stopping and slowing down and eating, not eating on the run. We all do it. We quickly grab our food and next minute we've eaten it. We have hardly tasted it. More importantly, our digestive enzymes haven't had a chance to kick in. Our brain hasn't even registered we've eaten. we've literally inhaled it. And then we wonder why we've got indigestion and issues around that as well. And then that leads to inflammatory and immune issues as well. So for me, it's that pausing and actually tasting each mouthful, the old word mindful, while we're eating is so beneficial, because you're going to, just the experience of doing that is going to change the vitamin structure or how you absorb as well.
Yeah, 100%.
I think it's so important, like still at work, we're all busy at work, but every day we sit down as a department and have lunch together. And so there's a social important connectivity aspect to that, but it just stops us doing exactly what you said, eating and running from place to place, not absorbing it well, wondering why I've got stomach cramps 30 minutes later because I'm trying to eat and walk and not digesting things well. And I think we're underplaying the value of getting the nutrients we need and vitamins we need from food, because there's a lot of co-absorption and cofactors that are really important for the natural absorption of those things. And we don't necessarily talk about that as much as possibly we should, getting things through their natural sources. The reason they're called the natural sources is because they're really good sources, because they're absorbed better that way. When you think about iron and vitamin C and other things, there's a facilitation when it comes through normal food.
100%, yeah. You go, sorry.
I just want to raise the issue too. Like, you look at Mother Nature, what is in absolute volume right now? Oranges, lemons, and mandarins. You could probably go to your neighbors and grab some lemons. I have lemon every morning. To me, that's another way of thinking about it, that the cycles of the seasons create certain foods as well for certain reasons, and I think there's some element of that too to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's moving away from that idea that that there's a superfood, like blueberries. Everyone should just eat their blueberries and then that'll solve all your problems, or your walnuts, or your whatever
Kale.
it is. Yes, kale. Yes, yeah. Whereas it's the contribution of all of those things together that is the super important thing, not the fact that you spend thousands of dollars on a punnet of blueberries and eat them all for yourself.
Or even worse, thousands of dollars on the powders of all of those foods.
Oh yeah.
I recently learned about it. Well, a friend who's just bought a bag for an exorbitant amount of money of, like, I think there's 100 different types of foods in it. And I was like, well, why don't you just eat those foods? Like, it would be so much cheaper and it's probably so much better because you'd absorb it properly. Yeah, there's a lot of gimmicks out there, unfortunately.
That's the other thing we end up talking about in these Hauora Kōrero, isn't it, Hannah? We always talk about stress and we always talk about kai. So, Anthony, just thinking about the field of inflammation, is there any cool research going on, or is there anything cool that's like on the edge of coming out that we all should know about firsthand from you?
I think one of the important areas that we've sort of been focusing on in our area in immunology is what we call autoinflammation. So it's the ability of our own bodies to generate inflammation and have these, it's not a virus, it's not anything else, but people just experience what we call autoinflammatory conditions, where the body essentially attacks itself and it has this huge immune response and it's just unregulated, and then it goes away. And it can often be misinterpreted as like, oh, I've had a cold or I've had something else. But actually, there isn't necessarily always a clear external trigger. And people keep having these repetitive, recurrent episodes of inflammation. And it's a bit different to maybe what we think about rheumatoid arthritis and some of those older conditions where we had antibodies, these what we call pathological, dangerous antibodies that we can detect, but they have a pattern like that something keeps having these recurrent episodes. And I think that's one of those things where people keep putting it off. They keep imagining something else is happening, or, bad luck, I've had 6 of these infections this year, or another virus, or this other thing. But actually, we're starting to understand sometimes our bodies become dysregulated and can attack themselves. I know it sounds horrible, your own body attacking you, but it is a really important part of what we're talking about tonight, is that maintenance of wellness, keeping things checked, talking to people about what's going on so that we can pick these things up and prevent some of that long-term damage. Because it's not just chronic inflammation that happens every day, but intermittent inflammation that comes and goes is still bad for you. And gout, there's an example. You don't want bad joints. You know, gout comes and goes, and I think all of our whānau will have a family member that suffers gout.
Yeah, indeed. Hannah, I'm just looking at the time and we're almost rounding off our kōrero for this evening, but you're the clinical exercise physiologist at the table. So how does exercise fit into this conversation about inflammation and immunity?
Well, you're lucky I've only got a few minutes, but basically, and I always say exercise influences and affects every single cell in the body. Exercise supports our cardiovascular system, our metabolic processes, our muscles. It helps makes us stronger. Everything works more efficiently if our cardiovascular system is as fit as it, or is getting fitter. I think it's really important to also recognize as well, though, that exercise itself causes an inflammatory response within our body. And so if we are looking after ourselves around that exercise, so for example, you do an appropriate bout of exercise for where you're at. So you're not sick and trying to exercise, you're well, and you're, doing an appropriate prescribed session, you're then recovering well afterwards. So you're eating well straight afterwards, you're doing the recovery strategies you need, you're sleeping really well, because it's actually when you sleep that you rebuild. Exercise is you breaking stuff down, sleep is when you're rebuilding it. So exercise needs to be coupled with appropriate recovery for it to be truly beneficial to supporting your body to progress and grow, and strengthen and develop and look after itself. And I think the other big thing as well, which we haven't really mentioned or touched on, is the fact that obviously a gym is inside, but a huge benefit to exercise, particularly in winter, is it gets you outside. And outside, sure, not all the time, but I have noticed over the last week there's been a large amount of sunshine during the day, which is great. And vitamin D is a huge regulator of our immune system in our bodies. So the more vitamin D we can be absorbing, and the easiest way to get that is through our skin. If we're exercising, we're warmer, so we're less likely to be wearing, the hoodie and the beanie and the gloves and the jacket and the pants and everything else, unless you live in the snow. Sorry about that. But getting outside, getting that sunshine, getting the fresh air, and moving, it's honestly the best medicine for you mentally, emotionally, physically, but also for your immune system. So move as often as possible, move in different ways, combine different varieties of exercise, but recover well afterwards. Yeah.
That's awesome. Hey, can I just ask you a quick question then? Post-COVID, someone has had COVID. When do they start exercising again?
Yeah, it's a really individual one, because everyone's getting different symptoms and different severities of the condition. My general rule of thumb is you need to allow a month of easy before returning to your normal exercise regime. And obviously that's dependent on sort of how your progress is going, how your recovery is going as well. But bear in mind that unfortunately COVID does affect all of our body, not just our lungs. And so we need to give the body a chance to truly recover. So if you're someone who monitors your heart rate, make sure that your recovery or your resting heart rate has lowered back to its normal rate, and it's not going crazy when you do walk. Make sure that you're sleeping well, eating well, all of those recovery strategies. But regardless, give yourself at least 4 to 6 weeks of true recovery before you start progressing back. And it's a short-term pain in the butt for a long-term gain.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Hannah. So to round us off tonight, I can't remember if I told you guys this at the beginning, but we end our Hauora Kōrero each month with your one tip for the whānau. So I'll keep talking for another minute or so you can think about your one golden tip that you're going to leave the whānau who are watching, and so that we can leave the whānau watching with something to go away with that's practical and that makes sense and that's easy to do. So Hannah, I'm going to start with you.
Yes, I was hoping you'd choose me. So mine's actually 2. But it's the 3 S's. So manage your stress, sleep really, really well, and get as much sunshine as you possibly can. So block out your lunchtime so you can get a long one and get into the sunshine, but finish work early enough. Don't have 7 p.m. Zooms, so that you can wind down and you can get a good night's sleep. Yeah.
Awesome. The 3 S's: sleep,
stress,
stress,
less,
and awesome. Thank you. Desiree.
I would have to say, start hugging each other again. The deep pressure and the experience, there's so much research on hugs. It downregulates our autonomic nervous system. It actually improves immunity. It reconnects us back to whānau, I think. Go out and hug someone. Just have that experience. Like, I mean, maybe someone you know to start with.
I was going to say.
And breathe, really think about the breath. It makes you present. But yeah, I do think there's something right now to us all reconnecting, and I think a hug is worth a lot.
I love that, Desiree. And so instead of giving your whoever you live with a quick hug in the morning to when you say goodbye, maybe it's a little bit of a longer one, eh? Yeah.
Yes.
Like actually enjoy the hug, not just the mechanical giving you a hug out the door.
Hold the space. 20 seconds at least.
Love it. Love it. Thank you. And Anthony.
I wanted one of the S's actually, but that's fine. I'm glad we said it. I would just say, make sure you keep check of yourself, check on yourself and say, am I okay? And also be that checkpoint for someone else. When you see someone not sleeping, stressed, ask them if they're all right. Do what Desiree said, be that point of support, give them a hug, check in on them, because I think we need to keep ourselves well by keeping that interconnectedness and checking on one another, because like I said before, sometimes we don't realize we're in the pot.
Yeah, so many gems from tonight's kōrero, you guys. Super appreciate you, Desiree and Anthony, for taking your time, for doing a 7 o'clock Zoom on a work night. Apologies for that. We really appreciate your guys' expertise and your willingness to help our whānau with a little bit of knowledge and sharing your experience and the mahi that you do. Desiree, thank you for the suit. We use it, as you know, and it's super helpful from a holistic point of view. You guys out there know that we run a kaupapa Māori model of health and a holistic model, and Desiree, the suits fits really nicely in that. Does some physical stuff, does some hinengaro stuff, it does some wairoa stuff, and so yeah, we've it's been a superb addition to what we're able to provide for whānau. So thank you very much. And Anthony, it's so awesome to have a Māori doc on who is just so, I mean, I love you anyway, but just so real, just it's so easy to talk to you and super informative. I've learned heaps tonight, and I'm sure the whānau super appreciate you being around. And for those of you watching, if you want to Google Anthony, he's got some really awesome, you've got some great videos just explaining in simple terms lots of stuff that especially over the COVID time. So thank you for the work that you did over that time, because we used your videos that you did for the whānau, because they, it was just to the point, super easy. So we really appreciate you. Thank you very much. And Hannah, Hannah, you're always here. We always appreciate you. Okay, whānau, well, we'll let you get back to your families and take care. I'm going to leave you with give someone a hug tomorrow, a proper one, a really good one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you back next month, which is September, next month's Hauora Kōrero is on the Maramataka. So we're going to be talking about the Māori lunar calendar and talking with some people who are integrating the Māori lunar calendar into their lives for their hauora. So hope to see you then. Thanks everyone. Ka kite.